Thank you all so much for welcoming me this morning. I'm 8 years of being welcomed into various churches, and I'm still clutching my program as though it will tell me when to do and not do. I'm hope to make up for my awkwardness, at least through being amusing. I tend to miss the context because for me this is quite a different experience. I was once asked to give the benediction before the city council meeting. Everyone, of course, stood up, dutifully doing what they're supposed to do because they're praying Christians, and I was done talking and they all stood there. Oh no, we don't say amen at the end. I'm not sure how to end this. And I stood and I finally just said, we don't say let us say amen in this context, so I'm done now. In which context I had difficulty because when being asked to speak about wisdom literature is a title given by Christian Bible scholars, which means that it is outside of my area of expertise. So I started to break my head over it, then to be embarrassed because both Reverend Hamilton and Reverend Malgett contacted me a week ago and said, "What are you speaking about? What's the title? What's the topic? Help us figure out music and hymns and things." And I went, you usually have your sermons done this far in advance? Perhaps we're from a more casual tradition. That's right. But what struck me, what was so hard for me about it was that it's a different concept in Hebrew when you approach it through Hebrew, which I thought might be interesting to bring up as a discussion topic. In Hebrew, all types of knowledge, wisdom, understanding, knowing, learning is relational. It's not something that you just get. It doesn't fall down from heaven. It's not something that you inherit, and it's not something that's intuitive. It's something based on relationship. Here's why I say. In Hebrew, when you are acquainted with someone, you don't know someone, you are acquainted with someone. You use the verb lehakir. Lehakir means to be acquainted with, to recognize. Kind of the way that most people are acquainted with the concept of quantum physics. It exists. I could probably make a one-sentence description of it if you had a gun to my head. I'm not so into the whole description of it thing, but I have somewhat of a passing familiarity with it, or even gravity. I have a passing familiarity with the concept that I will not fall off the earth if I jump high enough. But ask me to sort of break it down and calculate it, and we have now gone way beyond my commitment to this conversation. That is how we are acquainted with people. We can be friends with them, but when we talk about knowing someone, we don't talk about knowing them. Because, and this is just a modern English coincidence, when someone on TV is being judged for being on whatever daytime TV show they're being on, right, or court TV show or whatever, what's their response? You don't know me. You don't know me. Well, I know something about you that makes me feel judgmental, but on the other hand, I am acquainted with you, but I don't know you. In Hebrew, it's why we talk about knowing someone in the biblical sense. That means to have experience of, to have firsthand personal and intimate experience of. So you don't talk about knowing a person, because that's a very intimate statement. But when you talk about knowing a fact, you don't have passing familiarity with this fact. This is something that you know through experience. You have experienced it. When I say that I know that God is with me, I'm not saying I hope God is with me in Hebrew, and I'm not saying I believe God is with me. I'm saying I have had a direct experience in my life where something went wrong and I felt God stand with me. It is a statement of personal nitty-gritty experience. So too is the concept of faith. There's no word for faith in Hebrew. There's a word which is translated as faith. but doesn't actually mean faith. The word emunah, which is translated as faith, leha'amin, to believe, is better translated as to trust. I don't have faith in God, I have trust in God, and trust is relational. Faith is often taken in English to mean I have no evidence to back it up, but I think it anyway. Whereas trust is because I have already entered into a relationship. So yesterday, with the torrential downpours we were experiencing in Oklahoma City, we were halfway through our morning worship service. Jews have about 3 hours of Saturday morning worship service, so next time you get the opportunity, you hug Reverend Malkin and Reverend Hamilton so hard for not making you put up with a 3-hour Sunday service. We have a 3-hour Saturday service, and it's an hour and a half in, and we have 6 people in the room. Should we just skip the Torah reading? We can only do that if we have 10 Jewish adults in the room. No, we shouldn't skip it, I said, because I believe we will have people. I know we will have people. What I actually mean is not, I hope we have people, but rather, I know the community well enough to know that there are people who are on their way, and they're late because they come on the interstate and it's wet, or because they were slow moving this morning, but I know they are coming because of the experience we've had together. I don't believe, I trust. Right, in that nuance. I'm doing it because there is a proven track record, which tends to be what people mean when they say, I believe in God. But in English, you are allowed the wiggle room not to think that. I think that many people of faith would say, I am a person of faith because of a relationship, but in English, you don't always have that, and I think that in Hebrew, it is, you just don't have any other way of talking. You can't say, you can say I hope, you can say I expect, but you can't say I believe, you can say I trust. So when talking about wisdom literature, this idea that in Judaism, wisdom is not something that you are born with, and wisdom is not something that you get as a divine grant from God, but rather wisdom is something you have to acquire through learning, through knowing people, through figuring it out. We have a story about King Solomon who is credited in Jewish tradition with authoring the book of Proverbs. And 2 prostitutes from the same house come, and they are both claiming this baby. And he says, well, great, we'll just cut the baby in half and give half to you and half to you. And one of them says, good, at least then you can't have the baby. And the other one says, don't kill the baby, let her have it. And he identifies that one as the true mother, because true parents want the best for their children as opposed to wanting victory. And we consider this to be what is usually translated as wise, and a reason that King Solomon should be trusted as a person of wisdom, because he makes really good decisions. So we actually don't use the word wise, which in English tends to mean street smarts, intuitive or experientially wrought ways of knowing things, being able to apply knowledge in a way that not everybody can. We use the word chacham. Chacham means clever. It can also mean crafty, in the sense that you can be a wise guy and be wise, and that is the same thing, that you outsmart people. So what did Solomon do there? Solomon outsmarted somebody. It wasn't just that he was smart, and it wasn't just that he was good with things. He outsmarted someone. And that ability to apply knowledge is very important in the Jewish tradition, in terms of, that is the word we use to mean sage, in terms of, a sage of our tradition who strokes his beard or pretends she has a beard, one of the two, while Jews rock back and forth, while we learn rocking back and forth and reading holy text. But Solomon's not like that. And I love the fact that Solomon's not like that. I wish that we had more of that context of who Solomon is, because Solomon's tricky, and that's fantastic. But Solomon's seen a few things. Solomon I certainly know from my childhood Sunday school experience, I expected that David was a little bit of the wild child who settled into the kingship pretty well, and then Solomon is like his obviously regal son who builds the temple in Jerusalem and who is able to sit calmly in judgment before two, pairs of people who need things. But that's not who Solomon is. Solomon has been around the block a few times. Solomon has seen some stuff. And in Jewish tradition, we ascribe not only the book of Proverbs to Solomon, but also Song of Songs, Song of Solomon, and Ecclesiastes. And we take these as a progression in his life. When he is young, he writes Song of Songs, Song of Solomon. He is, what is the plot of Song of Songs? We call it Song of Songs. Song of Solomon. What's the plot of it? I am deeply in love with this person, and we keep missing each other. We have been chasing each other through history in sort of ridiculous ways, running around after one another, and what is keeping us going? Our absolute confidence in our own feelings. This is what's driving us forward in this sort of childlike, I love you, I hate you, I love you, I hate you kind of relationship. Ecclesiastes, which we also ascribe to Solomon, is when he's older. He's lost complete faith in a lot of institutions. The sort of thing that I think, especially after this weekend, many of us are thinking, like, this was supposed to have gotten better already. I was angry about this in high school, and it keeps coming back again, and I'm not really sure why, because we should have fixed it by now, right? We knew government was not working 50 years ago, but surely it should be working now. I've done all this stuff. We collectively have done all this stuff, and yet we can't manage to get it together to fix some of these very basic problems. And so Solomon in Ecclesiastes goes through with that sort of, I always picture like a veteran, like possibly a homeless by choice veteran with a cigarette and dirty work boots and a leather jacket, who's like, it's all vanity. It doesn't matter. It's not worth anything. That doesn't work. Don't trust that. Don't trust that either. Don't trust that. This has failed. This has failed. This has failed, right? Who's coming at it from a position of, I tried, I worked my hardest, it failed. You deal with it. I'm done. But Song of Songs is the one end, and if Ecclesiastes is the other, Proverbs is in the middle. Proverbs with that constant tone of, listen, my child, I need you to learn. Here is every fortune cookie I have ever read, with every important fortune in it, pasted together in an important way. This is all the wisdom I want. But I think I certainly am in danger of missing how that's a progression from one thing to the other, because Solomon comes to it with this tremendous background of things that worked and didn't work, especially things that didn't work. How many wives does Solomon have? The Bible says, do not multiply horses or wives. Don't acquire too many of these things. Don't go back to Egypt. Don't fall into the pitfalls and traps of stuff that God doesn't like. And Solomon does absolutely every one of them and then more. Solomon builds the temple. How does Solomon build the temple? It is not pious Jews who are building the temple. Who builds the temple? So the Lebanese mostly, because Solomon goes to war and they have to pay a sort of tax, a labor tax. That is to say, you have to spend 3 or 4 months a year working, hauling logs and constructing my temple. So fantastic. The crowning glory of Jewish achievement at that moment is built by slave labor. I'm not real comfortable with that. This is not the kind of thing that built the tabernacle, where the tabernacle in the wilderness is built by the love and good works of every person in the community, so much so that Moses has to say, okay, we have enough, don't bring any more. But I hand embroidered this thing. I've spent 9 months carving the pillar to make the corner just immediately, immaculately perfect. That's not what builds the first temple. So I think Solomon is a person who is very textured and has all of this sort of background. And then I pulled this out and I love it because I think we sort of blow by Solomon. I am guilty of this, like very quickly when we think that he's very, formal and has never gotten in trouble and that kind of thing. Because it says, the first chapter of Proverbs, you spurned all my advice and would not hear my rebuke, and I will laugh at your calamity and mock when terror comes upon you. And I think, especially when we're reading very formally with very formal sort of two-dimensional language, we think, well, that's obviously a metaphor for something, and that's obviously, I will mock you, well, I will succeed where you have failed. No. This I sort of figure is like a parent of a teenager who's sitting at the table with their feet up, on the table, going like, yeah, you can do that. It'll be dumb, but you can do it. Don't do that. Nope, I said don't do that. Right? This is well beyond Moses's be careful when you take the car out speech in Deuteronomy. Well, the entire book of Deuteronomy. This is into I have done it, I have lived it, and I expect you to make better decisions than I have. There's also an important point, though, of the way that he conducts himself. If Solomon has now lived this long life trajectory, he's done so many things, he's clever, he's crafty, he's got experience, he knows these things because he's lived them. So Solomon is clearly right about lots of stuff, absolutely clearly correct. More correct than lots of things, and I think especially today, we like to think that we know stuff, and when we know stuff, we are right, and being right is the most important thing. If being right is the most important thing, so what happens when being right separates us from community? So there's a Jewish story about this. There's a particular Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. Our tradition was deeply interrupted by the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem in the year 70 of the Common Era. So a lot of the things that had been kept orally, experientially, they were just things everybody knew. Well, everybody died in Jerusalem, so we don't know those things anymore. So we have this project of reconstructing what it is that we do know. We call that project the Mishnah. The Mishnah is from close of the canon is around the year 200, and it remembers rabbis all the way back to 200 BCE. It's about a 400-year time span. In all of the Mishnah, almost every sentence is attributed to somebody. It's quoted. You quote the rabbi who said it. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach is quoted only 2 times. He only ever has 2 quotations listed there. But when we're talking about somebody who is very learned, who really knows the text and really knows the Bible and really knows the law very well, somebody, a random unnamed voice, says if you took every sage active at the time and put them on one side of a balance scale, and Rabbi Elazar ben Arach on the other side of the balance scale, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach would win hands down. Well, if he's so brilliant, where did he go? Shouldn't we be quoting him all the time? Shouldn't everything in the Mishnah, this collection of what is true and what is thought and how things are thought, shouldn't he be quoted all the time? What happened to him? So, digging a little deeper into the tradition and some sort of historically parallel texts, there's a story that Rabbi Elazar ben Arach was so brilliant that he felt he was better than everyone else. And unfortunately, his wife agreed and said that, I don't know why you're wasting your time with these people. These yahoos don't really match up to you. You need to go somewhere to be with somebody who is of your equal intelligence level and of your equal skill level with the tradition. And the response was, okay, great. They moved to a lake somewhere in the middle of the woods, far away from not just Jewish community, but far away from human community, far away from people. He was so right, he had to go live by himself. So, and we know where this is going. So after a couple of decades, they sent a delegation to go find out how he was doing, because they just hadn't heard from him anymore. He just wasn't there. He didn't participate in synagogue life. He wasn't learning with them. He just stopped coming. So they went to find him and went to talk to him. And it turns out that having been so right he had to go away from people, he had lost all of his learning. He'd forgotten every bit of it. He had none of it left. Because he was so right that he had to go be by himself, well, there was no value in it. Our tradition takes this as, if you are so right that you can't have community anymore, then you are wrong. There is no excuse for claiming that you are so right that you have to push people away. I think that all of this provides something which I believe is parallel in your tradition as well. The idea that you can never learn enough, that you can never allow your learning to distance you from the rest of humanity, that you can never rely on just yourself for claiming that you are wise or for acting wisely, and that we need other people both to learn our wisdom from, to give our wisdom to, and also to live our wisdom as part of our regular lives. That we know that being wise brings you closer, it doesn't push you further away. Being wise is supposed to be constructive, not destructive, as we see people who believe that they are wise, who decide to put their wisdom to use toward hating people and making themselves distant from community and breaking down, rather than using their wisdom to build up. So how do we know that something is real? How do we know that something is trustworthy? How do we know that something is from God? My favorite satire author, Terry Pratchett, said of a particular person, he believes God is speaking to him, but really he is so closed-minded, he is only hearing an echo of his own voice. And I think we all know people like that. I think we all have moments like that. And I think that we all recognize that that does not equal wisdom, and that wisdom has to come in conversation and in community. So thank you all very much for allowing me to be part of your community this morning. Thank you very much.
I have to hear the Moses and the car story.
Oh no, just I contextualize almost the entire book of Deuteronomy as Moses treating the people of Israel like they're teenagers taking the car out for the first time. I'm not going to be there to protect you. You're going to go out, you're going to mess up, and I'm not going to be there. And you need to follow what's right, because if you don't, I'm not getting you out of a ticket. If you get a ticket, you're paying for it. You will be back by curfew, and if you don't, there will be consequences, young lady. And you have to have respect, and I just don't think you have respect. But without me there to enforce it, I just think that's the entire book of Deuteronomy, especially this past week, the Jewish world was reading in the middle of Deuteronomy, and this terrific rant of Moses that's like, you people have been terrible since the beginning. What is Moses' great expectation of the first encounter with Jews? Moses leaves the palace, he walks out, he finds a Jewish slave being beaten by an Egyptian. He unintentionally kills the Egyptian in stopping the Egyptian from beating the slave. Then the next day he comes out, sees two Jews arguing, and he says, why are you arguing? You're brothers, you're all Jews. And what do? Do they say, Moses, the great savior of the Jewish people? No, they say, what are you going to do? Kill us like you killed that other Egyptian and hide us in the sand? And then he's like, oh no, not living up to my expectations, and has to run away to Midian. So then when he comes with this tremendous rant, you people are the cause of me not getting into the land of Israel, and of my brother Aaron not getting into the land of Israel because you needed a golden calf to worship instead of waiting. I told you to wait for me. I love it, and I think some of this is because I'm clergy that I love it, that he just sort of loses it. But I think a lot of it is also like, as a human being, I'm expected to be a grown-up all the time, and other people don't always act like they're expected to be grown-ups all the time, and I sort of have these moments of like, why do I have to be the grown-up in this conversation? I don't want to be the grown-up. I want to be a kid. I want to shout and scream and throw mud pies and put skunk smell in your car because I'm mad. And I love that Moses just sort of comes, goes off book for a while. And I feel like the way he goes off book is in a lot of ways the way that you chastise your teenager before they go out on their own for the first time, because Moses knows they're going to go wrong, and I love to think that Moses knows they're going to go wrong, but knows they're going to find their way back also. We have a homily. I think homily is the right word. I'm translating in my head. We have a homily where they suppose that God tells Moses is writing the Torah, and the Torah, from Genesis to Deuteronomy, is written in Hebrew. And one of the requirements for it is that certain letters have these teeny little, we call them crowns. I think they look like peacock feathers. It's these little at the top of the letter. And Moses says, why? And God says, well, one day there will be a rabbi called Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva will interpret every little thing. And he says, I'd like to see that rabbi. And then God time travels Moses into Rabbi Akiva's learning center, his yeshiva, where the way it works is that the chairs are for rabbis, sages, scholars, and students on their way to being, and then there's sort of standing room only at the back for the rest of us schmoes. And then Moses ends up all the way back at the way back of the cheap section, and they're arguing about this fine point of Jewish law, this minor little thing. Moses is completely distraught because he has no idea what they're talking about or why this is important. This is not what I went up to Mount Sinai for. What is going on? And Rabbi Akiva says to a student, how do we know this? And the student says, this is a law from Moses at Sinai, and Moses feels better because even though things have evolved beyond where he was, what he did is still the foundation of what they are doing, so that he is part of a long chain of knowledge and a long chain of learning that started with his relationship with God and goes forward. And he is comforted on that because now he's part of this relational chain.
Where would you put Dr. Phil in the middle of all this? He's the guy that did classic is, and how's that working for you?
I have a Dr. Phil in my head who occasionally says, "You're an idiot." Like everybody else, I think that he has a lot to say, and also like everyone on TV, I think he's selling a product, so I don't buy everything he says. And I certainly, I'm not fun to watch TV with. I yell at the screen. And there was a book written a long time ago that was called, But Was It Good for the Jews? And so occasionally I'm like, wow, you come from a really particular background that's not pluralistic of you. At the same time, like, I like the entrance into personal responsibility of like, I respect your process and you've tried it and I can't force you to do anything. Like Moses said, you tried it and it didn't work and you found out I was right experientially. Like, that's something you have experienced, that's something you know. So like, now are you ready to step out of it? We have this great story about a rabbi who could heal people. And he would, what he would say is, are you ready for your suffering to end? And their response was, I don't want my suffering and I don't want any rewards I could get from it. And at that point, he was then able to heal them, because I think we all get something out of doing things wrong. Like there's either because like bacon cheeseburgers taste amazing, they're just not kosher, I'm not supposed to eat them, but they taste so good. But also like suffering has certain rewards of its own. So I think like making the onus be on the person to say like, do you recognize this? Is it working for you? And are you ready to like see if you can move forward a little bit? I also think it's a huge leap asking people to trust him when he's never seen them before. But, you know, just like everybody else.
And he doesn't know that much about it.
Fine, and I know that, I mean, it's not a magic trick. There are certain people who walk into your life and they're just something they're just giving off, right? You are acquainted with enough about them that you know certain things. I mean, I get that, but like, it's TV, right? I mean, how many people is he helping by publicizing this stuff? And at the same time, how many people are not helped by that format? I think it's just like if you make phone calls for people to come to church versus if you email them. If you email them, some people will come, but if you make phone calls, different people will come. Yes, exactly. If you show up, more people will come, among other things, because you'll be there.
As you're sitting down, didn't enough people show up?
Yes, they did. Yes, all of them showed up wet and angry at the weather, but like, then I said, you know, we have board games and lentil soup, and so bunches of people stayed, and I think the building finally emptied out at 7:30 p.m. So, because we don't buy food on the Sabbath, which means we aren't trying to get to the Golden Corral after services. So we come late or on time and never leave, as opposed to coming early to socialize and leaving on time. So,
Thank you so much.
thank you.